I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
And continuing with our theme of religious leaders who kill family members, today we are going to tell you about a truly horrifying monster whose crimes span years and involve more than murder.
Oh, joy.
Around 10 p.m. on July 29th, 2008, on the outskirts of Jackson, Alabama, traveling preacher Anthony Hopkins was in the middle of preaching about the importance of forgiveness and not passing judgment. He looked at his 7 children sitting still and listening intently in the audience and asked them to forgive him his past, present, and future. The faithful gathered at the small revival being held in the inspirational Tabernacle Church of God were in rapt attention listening to the charming silver tongued preacher. A revival, for those of you who are secular like us, involves a group of Christians praying and seeking the Holy Spirit's presence together while rejoicing over a renewed spiritual exuberance. The purpose of a church revival is to allow the power of the Holy Spirit to transform both believers and non believers alike. Through revival meetings, people sense the power of God and are called to prayer and repentance.
So, overall, fun times.
Apparently, for some. Outside the church, Clark County Sheriff Chief Investigator Sergeant Ron Baggett listened through the closed church door for the sermon to end.
As soon as the talking stopped, police calmly entered the building, very aware that the Hopkins children were present and eager for the arrest to not turn into a hostage situation. Officers handcuffed Anthony and led him out of the church. The audience broke into concerned and confused speculation. What was going on? Fellow pastor Beverly Jackson, who was also preaching at the revival, said no one could understand why the police were there and why they had handcuffed Anthony. Beverly said she'd spoken to Anthony earlier in the evening, and he said that he was a single parent, 8 children, since his wife had died in childbirth. What on earth had transpired that police would storm a church revival? Outside, Anthony asked, "What have I done?" Sergeant Baggett, not missing a beat, said, "I don't know, Mr. Hopkins. It may have something to do with the dead body in your freezer." Smooth-talking Anthony decided to momentarily stay silent. However, a few minutes later, he asked if he could call his oldest daughter, who wasn't with the rest of the family at the revival. The answer was a firm no. Anthony, along with his 7 children, was driven to a Mobile police station. While Anthony was being questioned, his 7 children sat quietly, waiting to find out why they were there and what was happening with their father. Mobile County Corporal Michael Schaefer asked the well-behaved brood if they wanted anything to eat or drink. They all looked at their second oldest sibling for what to say. She politely declined and said they didn't want anything. Corporal Schaefer said he had never seen a group of children sit so quietly, not fidgeting or asking to get up or what was going on, just sitting there waiting to see what would happen next. He said it was unnerving. Anthony was booked into the Mobile County Jail, and the 7 younger children were taken into protective custody. The eldest stepdaughter was staying with a neighbor. Okay, let's go back a bit to find out why this charismatic preacher, raising 8 children on his own, had a body in his freezer.
This twisted and sick case we are going to share with you is all because a strong and courageous girl told first her neighbor and then the police about what had been going on behind the closed doors of the Hopkins home. Some media outlets have named this girl Anthony's eldest stepdaughter. She was 19 when the crimes were revealed, but they started when she was only 11 because we have not seen anywhere where she has shared what happened to her, except during her court testimony. We aren't comfortable using her name. We will just be referring to her by her first initial, S. Kind-hearted and concerned neighbor Carolyn Kelly noticed S outside walking down the street with no shoes on. Carolyn invited S over, gave her some warm clothes and a warm drink, and asked the obviously pregnant girl what was going on. S said she had gotten into a fight with her father and was going to leave. S admitted that she was pregnant, and Carolyn tried to gently push S about who the father was. S told her, "You really don't want to know what's going on with me." A little more back and forth, and S dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant with her stepfather's baby. He had been abusing her since she was a literal child.
We've just started and I already feel sick.
Yeah, you and me both. Carolyn called the Mobile Police Department's Child Advocacy Center and relayed what S had told her to Corporal Michael Schaefer. He asked if Carolyn could bring S to the station. Carolyn drove a frightened S to the station, where she was interviewed by Corporal Schaefer and Detective Kent Quinney. I listened to audio of both of these law enforcement officers being interviewed, and they both, and I'm sure without ill intent, said that S had had sex with her stepfather. And I just threw up in my mouth a little.
Hmm.
Uh, they in no way inferred that S was a willing participant because, of course, a child is unable to give consent because this is not sex, it is rape. It is still rape when she is 19. I'm sure sensitivity training and correct usage of terms regarding rape and sexual assault hadn't made it to all departments in all corners of the US in 2008, but it sure fucking should have. We will be using the correct term for what Anthony did to S as rape, sexual assault, or sexual abuse, because that was what it was. We as a society really need to do a better job.
Yeah, I'm sure they didn't mean to imply that she consented, but still, gross. Use the correct fucking term. No child is having sex with their father figure. Come on.
I know.
S explains that her stepfather began abusing her when she was 11. He would come into her room at night when the rest of the house was asleep. They asked her if her mother was aware of the abuse. S said no. Well, until a night in December of 2004, that was. S was in the bathroom when Anthony came in and began touching her inappropriately. Her mother, Arletha, came into the room and witnessed the abuse. Being a mama bear, or really any halfway decent human being, she immediately got Anthony away from her daughter and told him to get out of the house. He pleaded and tried to explain it away, saying it wasn't what it looked like. Arletha, thankfully, wasn't having any of his lies. She kicked Anthony out that night and locked all the doors. And if only that was where the story ended. Arletha told S that she would rather die than have Anthony hurt and abuse her. S went to bed but was awoken by knocking on her bedroom window. She went to the window and, like in a horror movie, Anthony was standing there, begging her to let him in. So she did. Anthony snuck through S's room and went to the master bedroom. Loud fighting and arguing ensued. S was standing in the hallway listening. Several of her younger siblings came out of their rooms to ask what was going on. Anthony came out and told them to all go to their rooms and not come out until he told them it was okay. Anthony went back to the master bedroom, and S heard more fighting. She then heard a loud thump, and her baby brother, who slept in a bassinet next to his parents' bed, started crying. S went into the bedroom to comfort her infant brother. She saw her mother on the floor, flailing and gasping for air, asking for help and to please not let me die. Anthony yelled at S to take her brother and leave the room. S did as she was told because what other option did she have? She went to her room and calmed her brother down. S heard another loud noise, and then silence. A few minutes later, Anthony came into S's room and told her that her mother was dead.
Corporal Schaefer and Detective Quinney are surprised and not sure if everything they are being told is true. They ask S where her mother is now. She says she's in the house. Taken aback, they ask again, "She's in the house?" S says, "Yes, she's in the freezer." The officers immediately begin to investigate. Corporal Schaefer starts searching the internet for any mention of Arletha in the past 4 years. He couldn't find any records. Her driver's license had expired in 2005 and had never been renewed. Corporal Schaefer and Detective Quinney believed they had enough for a search warrant. They knew they had to act quickly because 7 other children were living in the Hopkins home. They drafted a search warrant and headed to the home of Judge Michael McMakin. He signed the warrant and told the officers he had never heard anything like what they told him and asked them to let him know what they found at the house. Detectives arrived at the Hopkins residence, announced themselves, but no one appears to be home. They enter through the back door and they immediately notice the home is exceptionally tidy. Nothing is out of place. In the kids' bedrooms, they notice no mess. The beds are made and the shoes are all neatly lined up under the beds. They see desks, but conspicuously absent are any toys. They make their way through the rest of the small house to a closed door. S had told them that this would be the utility room and would be where they would find the freezer. They open the door and start list. Right away, they see a number of flies flying around and notice the unmistakable stench of decomp. They know there is a body in this room.
It's always the bugs that get me. Maggots are the worst, though. Those little fuckers can jump. Ugh.
That is new information. I didn't know that. Gross. Didn't you watch Bones?
Yeah, it's a good point. That wasn't real, though, so I could handle it.
That makes sense.
But thankfully, maggots aren't one of the things they find. Tape is wrapped around the small chest freezer, and a generator is hooked up to the appliance. So even if there are power outages, which can be common during hurricane season, the freezer's contents will remain frozen. Police remove extension cords, insect repellent, and other items jockeying for space on top of the freezer. They open the freezer and see a large frozen mass of ice, through which they see something wrapped in a dirty sheet, and most chillingly, a hand protruding from the mass. This is real. They know S has told them the truth. They lock down what is now a crime scene and call the forensics team. M.E. John Krolikovsky and the forensics team arrive and call for an evacuation team to remove the freezer to their forensics lab. It will take a while for the body to thaw out so they can verify the identity and hopefully the cause of death. They have enough to arrest Anthony, but they aren't sure where he is. Detective Quinney gets Anthony's vehicle information and finds out that it has a GPS tracker. But when they track the vehicle, they find that it is in nearby Clark County, which is out of their jurisdiction. They contact Sergeant Ron Baggett with Clark County, and he heads up the arrest team to find Anthony, which drops us back off to where we began the episode. Anthony was denied bond at a short court appearance on July 31st, where he made no comment. At his arraignment on August 5th, he pled not guilty to the charge of murder. He was also charged with rape, sodomy, sexual abuse, and incest, and was given a bail of $790,000, $750,000 for murder, and $10,000 each for the other various sexual abuse charges. He was accused of killing his wife and stuffing her into a freezer almost 4 years earlier. He was also accused of sexually abusing at least 2 of the 8 children, including both of his stepdaughters in the house he shared until 4 years ago with his wife. Unable to post bond, Anthony remained in jail.
Investigators continued going through the Hopkins home. They confiscated some porn DVDs and male enhancement products. They also removed cloth seat covers from a trailer parked outside the home, which appeared to have bodily fluid stains. They had a blood specialist come to the home, where after spraying luminol, they found blood spatter evidence in the master bedroom. They also found semen stains on S's bedding. Investigators noted that along with the military tidiness of the inside of the home, the garage was also meticulously clean and organized. Bikes were parked from smallest to largest, and even balls were organized by color. They noticed that there were family pictures in the home, but not one picture included Arletha. Anthony was literally trying to wipe away the existence of their mother. Behavioral scientist Dr. Stephen Wormuth suggested that Anthony's behavior and actions were all in an effort to control all aspects of his family's life.
I mean, controlling behavior is fundamental to abuse.
That it is. He went on to say that this was a morbid attempt to remove any symbolic representation of Arletha in the eyes of her children. Because children don't have the cognitive development that adults have, it is easier for children to forget the presence of their mother when she's no longer in their lives. Since the children were homeschooled and the family kept to themselves, and Arletha's family did not live close by, no one had reported Arletha missing. Depending on who he was talking to, Anthony initially had two separate scenarios he would share regarding where Arletha was. The first one that he told his children the day after he murdered his wife was that their mother was gone. She had taken a job as a seamstress and moved to California. The other story, and the one that garnered much sympathy, was that Arletha had died in childbirth, giving birth to her eighth child.
Yeah, poor him having to raise all those kids on his own after he murdered their mother.
Yeah, I'm sure he enjoyed that, knowing what he did and confident that none of his children would ever say anything.
I'm sure. So, who were Arletha and Anthony Hopkins? Arletha grew up in a deeply religious family in a small town in Georgia. Arletha's faith was the driving force in her life. She wanted to get married, have children, and raise them in a religious household in which the church was the focal point of their lives. She met and married her first husband when she was young and had two daughters. However, that marriage ended in divorce. When her daughters were still young, she met Anthony, who she believed shared her views on religion and family. Anthony had recently been discharged from the army where he served in Kazakhstan as a paratrooper. They married in 1994 and Anthony adopted Arletha's daughters. The newly minted Hopkins family began expanding. Arletha gave birth to 6 more children in 10 years. The emotional capacity of having 8 children is hard to comprehend, but Arletha seemed to thrive. While I may feel the need to lay down at the idea of it, Arletha took on the role of teacher in addition to parent, homeschooling all of her children. Anthony worked odd jobs to keep the family afloat. He was very much the king of his domain. He demanded respect and controlled the lives of his family. He treated his house like military barracks, demanding strict order and excellently mannered children who were not allowed to act like children but were treated as soldiers. In 2001, Anthony got his pastor's certificate and began working as a traveling preacher. He would spread the good word at various churches but wasn't affiliated with a specific denomination. Anthony developed a following because the many people who heard him preach at various churches and revivals around the rural South considered him a prophet who could see the future.
And I'll just be a little snarky and say he wasn't much of a prophet if he didn't see it coming, that he was going to be arrested for raping his two stepdaughters and murdering his wife.
It's true, though. It isn't that much of a gift if you can't use it to help yourself, too.
Yeah.
Arletha, a talented singer, formed a gospel singing group with the children and would travel and perform at the various churches Anthony preached at. The uplifting message that the family exuded seemed to be in contrast with what some churchgoers explained as strange behavior from the children. The always meticulously dressed and polite children would sit in order of youngest to oldest child in the front pew as their father was delivering his sermon. They would not speak or fidget and sat like little soldiers. When the service was over, other kids from the congregation would run around and play outside, but not the Hopkins children. They simply stood, not talking, waiting for further direction from their drill master father, which is such a tragic image.
It really is. Beyond some church members buying wholeheartedly his message, what did others think about Anthony? Neighbor Dasher, love these names, Dasher Parker said that the family kept to themselves and traveled around a lot as a family. The Hopkins had only lived in Mobile for a little over a year. He was shocked by Anthony's arrest. As with most people, he didn't think something like this would ever happen in his community. Mary Best, Arletha's stepmother, told the Associated Press that she knew something was wrong when she was unable to reach Arletha on her cell phone. She said the couple had separate cell phones and her phone got cut off. The recorded message said the number was no longer in service. She was finally able to reach Anthony, who told her the family had moved to California, but he was unable to put Arletha on the phone or have her call Mary back. I did feel like something happened to her, she said.
And how could you not?
Yeah. Sometimes people just don't dig that deep. Arletha's aunt, Shelley Bess, said that she last saw the entire Hopkins family in the small town of Wadley in 2003 when they came to sing at their local church. Carl Richardson, pastor of the Jackson church where Anthony was arrested, said he appeared to be a real man of God. So to hear something like this, we have to be careful about who we trust in these days and times. That's right, Pastor Richardson. We sure do need to be careful. Looks can be deceiving.
And you never know what really goes on behind closed doors.
So true.
Pastor Jerry Porter said he used to preach with Anthony at his own church, the Williams Street Holiness Church, and knew the family. He said Arletha was very quiet. She was kind of secluded. She'd talk, but not much. Probably because Arletha was conditioned, i.e., coerced, to behave in a certain way, just like her children. Pastor Porter did go on to say that Anthony had said some things that led him to believe that all was not well at home. Anthony even told Jerry that you're blessed in the fact that you have a wife that supports you and what you're trying to do for God.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really getting an unsupportive vibe from your wife, Anthony. Jerry went on to say that Arletha disappeared shortly after the couple's youngest child was born. And as the whispered rumors got louder, he confronted Anthony, asking him point blank whether Arletha was dead. Anthony wouldn't give him an answer. Of course, Jerry didn't go to the police with any suspicions he may have had. But that's okay because he banned him from the church while remaining on good terms with him.
How very righteous of him.
I mean, he couldn't possibly voice his suspicions about a fellow pastor. Jerry, further sticking his foot in it, said he had visited the Hopkins home several years after Arletha had evaporated into thin air and saw that their home was clean and well kept. He went on to say it was the ideal family. I mean, the children were so respectful, just so easygoing. There didn't seem to be any stress at all. The children, he said, loved their dad. They were very close to him.
Because the house was clean and the children were polite does not mean everything is fine. Oh my God.
And fear, which I would imagine is what the children were exhibiting, isn't love.
That's right.
Almost 2 years after Arletha's body was found in the freezer, Anthony's trial was getting underway. A pool of 50 potential jurors were questioned. Defense attorney Jeff Dean asked prospective jurors whether anyone thought preachers should be held to a higher standard of behavior because of their profession. One potential juror, who woke up with all of his little gray cells working that morning.
That's great. I love the pro reference.
Thanks. This potential juror said yes, they should practice what they preach. After several days of questioning, the prosecution and defense chose 8 men and 8 women to serve as jurors. Those 16 were chosen and would listen to trial testimony. 4 of the jurors were alternates, and only 12 members would be involved in deliberation after the trial was completed.
During the pretrial hearing, Mobile County Assistant District Attorney Ashley Rich, who incidentally was the first woman ever elected as DA for the 13th Judicial Circuit for the District of Alabama,
Go her.
right, said prosecutors will show the continued pattern of abuse, mind games, and control that resulted in the stepdaughter not coming forward to police until 4 years after her mother's death. DA Rich said the stepdaughter, who had 1 abortion and 1 miscarriage after Anthony continually raped her, gave birth in November 2008, and that Anthony was the father.
It's just so upsetting.
It's gross, upsetting, all the things.
Yeah.
D.A. Rich said traveling preacher Anthony lived a double life as again, with the phrase, a man of God who preached at churches while storing his wife's dead body in a freezer and having sex with his stepdaughter, raping his stepdaughter. Let's say that correctly. He began abusing his eldest stepdaughter when she was 11, telling her that it was okay because he was a religious man, preacher, and a prophet. As we mentioned, Anthony told his children that their mother had run away to California for a seamstress job and wouldn't be coming back. He told members of various churches he sermonized at that his wife had died in childbirth. All the while, she was in the freezer right next to the washer and dryer. We don't know what the children truly believe happened to their mother, but they were so frightened and brainwashed by their father, they had no other choice but to not question him and to never, ever go into the utility room.
I don't know what else they could have done to survive in that house.
Yeah, I completely agree. Defense attorney Sid Harrell told jurors that they must pay attention to the requirements of the law and start the trial with a clean slate, which I guess means don't pay attention to what you have heard in the media and please look at me and only hear what I am saying.
Uh,
In information that has absolutely nothing to do with the trial, Attorney Harrell made a point of telling the jurors that Anthony was awarded medals for his service in the U.S. Army in Kazakhstan and worked as a nurse's aide to help support his 8 children. I suppose mentioning that he got some medals would make the jury forget that he raped his stepdaughter for 8 years and murdered his wife and stuffed her body in the freezer.
as if that in some way excused years of heinous crimes. S took the stand and said that Anthony warned her not to tell anyone about her mother's dead body in the freezer, or she would be cursed by God. He said, "The Lord has covered it. Why would you want to uncover something the Lord has already covered?" Which is solid reasoning on Anthony's part right there. S, who recounted years of abuse, wept as she told jurors about the night her mother died on December 4th, 2004, when she was only 16 years old. She said she heard her parents fighting, then she heard banging and other loud noises. She walked into the room and saw her mother on all fours on the floor, crying for help. But she didn't call the police because she was confused and scared. After hiding in her bedroom, Anthony came to her room and told her that her mother was dead. He asked this 16-year-old child, whom he had legally adopted, manipulated, and sexually abused for the last 5 years, to help him move her mother's body. Anthony said that God would want them to clean up the area and move her mother's body. Because when it comes to murder, I'm sure cleanup is God's primary concern. So they wrapped Arletha's body in a blanket, carried her to a trailer attached to Anthony's van, and placed 2 trash cans in the trailer to conceal the body. They drove to a partially wooded area in the nearby town of Sams, dumped the body, not burying it or covering it in any way, then drove home. Anthony, devoid of a conscience but worried that his wife's dead body may be easily found, couldn't sleep. He woke up S in the early morning and told her they had to move her mother's body again. They drove to Sam's, put her body back in the trailer, then drove to a church in rural Jackson, where they dug a grave and put her body into it. Arthur Mitchell testified that he was driving past his church when he saw a strange van parked near a utility shed on the church's property. Concerned, he pulled over and was getting ready to get out of his vehicle to see what was going on when Anthony walked up to him and told him that a pastor at the church asked him to do some survey work. So he brought his eldest child to help him. Arthur noticed a girl standing near a hole holding a shovel. Arthur thought that explanation was a little weird, but he left them to it and drove away. He had no idea that the hole was a grave. After Arthur left, Anthony quickly threw some dirt on the makeshift grave and returned home.
Worried that the grave wasn't deep enough and was hastily dug, Anthony told us that they needed to move her mother's body one more time.
His incompetence would almost be funny if this wasn't also horrific.
Agreed. They drove to the church and noticed that the body had begun to bloat and was now partially visible. They removed Arletha's decomposed body and returned home. Anthony told us to open the utility door and to open the new chest freezer he had purchased. They then carried her mother's body and placed her in the freezer. However, the freezer was small and the body didn't easily fit. S said that her stepfather jumped up and down on the body to make it fit inside the freezer. He then wrapped the freezer with tape. Anthony groomed S to be a replacement for his murdered wife. S said all the responsibilities of the household were now hers. She was responsible for cooking, cleaning, and homeschooling her siblings. After her mother's murder, Anthony ramped up his sexual assaults, raping her almost nightly. She said that Anthony used the Bible and his belief that he was a religious prophet to manipulate her and make her believe she would be cursed by God if she did not follow his orders. He convinced her that it was okay and would tell her Bible stories to justify the abuse and that God would approve. She testified that, again, he was a man of God, so she just trusted everything he said.
And he's had years to brainwash her, so why wouldn't she?
Yeah, no, let's not victim blame. Poor thing.
Yeah.
When asked about Anthony's treatment of her brothers and sisters, she testified that Anthony would punish them by making them hold their arms up or lie in a push up position for hours. Asked why she never told police what she saw Anthony do, she said she feared that my dad was going to go to jail and we wouldn't have anywhere to go. We'd be split up. Several of the younger siblings also testified to the noises and fighting they heard on the day their mother was murdered. They further testified that though he told his children their mother had moved to California, he told members of the church where he preached at that she had died in childbirth.
On cross examination, Attorney Dean felt the need to question S about seeing a hammer in Anthony's hand on the night of her mother's murder. He asked her where she was when she saw him holding the hammer. S said she saw Anthony coming down the hall with the hammer from her room. We'd guess that this line of questioning was an attempt to poke holes in the prosecution's case, since because the body was so badly decomposed, a cause of death couldn't be proven. Dr. John Krolikovsky with the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences said he didn't find any evidence of bone fractures, lacerations, or other trauma on the decomposed body. He said he reached the conclusion of homicide based on the unusual history of the body, including being kept in a freezer at a house powered by a generator. Because what's the other option? She took her own life in the freezer and no one who lived in the house noticed for years? Confirmation that the body in the freezer was Arletha's was determined by extracting DNA from a tooth and comparing that to samples of Arletha's parents' DNA. Attorney Harrell told the jurors that Anthony was not being charged with anything that happened after Arletha's death. He also said that Anthony was trying to raise 8 children. This man is doing what he can.
I mean, I assume he didn't practice that line in front of another person or even in the mirror because I don't know how he thought that BS was going to be received.
Yeah, jury, please ignore the years of rape. My client is clearly a model father whose wife just happened to end up in the freezer. Mary Best testified that the last time she saw her stepdaughter or her grandchildren was when they visited her Georgia home in the spring of 2004. She testified that she had tried to reach Arletha on the phone many times, but never could. Anthony testified in his own defense because, of course, he did. Defense attorneys, because really, they didn't have a lot to work with, asked Anthony about his military service. Anthony said he served in the U.S. Army in Kazakhstan in the late 1990s and earned a medal for his service. Tarnishing that medal a little, he did acknowledge that he was arrested in Saraland, near Mobile, in 1998 for being absent without leave from the Army in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, from June 15, 1995 until April 6, 1998. Trying to paint the picture of himself as the noble patriarch, He decided to leave the army after he got orders to serve in Korea and could not take his family with him.
He definitely needed to try and spin the information that was out there to something that didn't make him look like the perverted piece of shit he was. He had a new explanation about what had happened to his wife. He came home, and wouldn't you know it, she was dead on the bedroom floor with their youngest child beside her. I was shocked and I began to shake her, and I was like, Letha, Letha, are you all right? I began to shake her, tilt her head back, and do CPR. He didn't know what happened, but out of fear that he would be arrested and that he would be separated from his children, he decided not to call the police. Instead, he asked his oldest stepdaughter to help him move her mother's body. He told jurors, I felt bad doing it, but I didn't want my wife to decompose. I didn't want her to stink. It was my wife. I didn't understand why she was dead. He said he later decided to move his wife's body to a freezer because I knew a freezer would preserve a body, at least until it came forward.
Because obviously he was going to eventually come forward, he just hadn't gotten to it yet.
Of course he was. He went on to say that he tried to keep her body preserved because he could not stand the thought of her decomposing. He said his family continued to live their life together, preaching and going to work after his wife's death. Though S had told jurors that Anthony jumped up and down on the body to make it fit in the freezer, he denied this, saying his wife's body fit snugly, though I did press the freezer down. D.A. Rich questioned Anthony about finding his wife's body, asking, if you loved her so much, why didn't you give her a funeral? He quietly replied, I wish I would have.
This next little bit is disgusting, but this is the lie he chose to go with. Regarding the sexual abuse that S said began when she was 11, when Anthony testified, he denied this and said their first sexual encounter,
No, you monster, it is rape.
because you are undeniably a rapist. It wasn't until March 2008 when his stepdaughter, who he made sure to mention was 19, approached him in the living room wearing a chocolate negligee. From that point, I was tempted and I yielded to the temptation. As a result, she got pregnant.
After all, he is a man, and that little temptress, he just couldn't help himself. And it was her fault. She initiated it.
Because he's such a fucking stud that she chose to seduce him, the controlling father figure who's been in her life for years.
I assume while he spewed this BS, he looked straight ahead, not glancing at the jury at all.
You would think so. After deliberating for about 90 minutes, the 6-man, 6-woman jury convicted Anthony of murder, second-degree rape, second-degree sex abuse, second-degree sodomy, and incest. The children who had grown up in his horrific home and who had testified against him stood in the front row, hugging each other and crying as the verdict was read out. Anthony stared straight ahead with no visible emotion. D.A. Rich said outside of the court, there is nothing pleasing about any of this. It is all very disturbing. We have a number of children who have been harmed by this man, and the chances of them ever fully recovering are very slim. She commended the young women who had the courage to testify against him, saying they are very strong. D.A. Jill Phillips said that Anthony terrorized his wife and young children, isolated them, and used the Bible to manipulate them, saying he was the supreme commander of his own little army. Defense attorneys left court without answering questions.
Before sentencing, Anthony said he was very apologetic for my choices, maintaining that he didn't know how his wife died. Mobile County Circuit Judge John Lockett told Anthony his actions and conduct were abhorrent in a civilized society. Judge Lockett then imposed the maximum sentence on each count. Anthony was sentenced to life plus 51 years in prison. The sentences are to run consecutively. D.A. Rich said Anthony hid behind the Bible to commit these crimes, and we hope he never gets out.
Fingers crossed.
Anthony's defense attorneys threw out a last-ditch Hail Mary, saying Anthony suffered from chronic lung disease and needed to be confined in a special institution. Judge Lockett, not suffering fools, said that would have to be taken up with the state prison system. All of Anthony's biological children had been living with Mary Best in Georgia since shortly after their father's arrest. Mary commended the jury, saying they saw the same thing I did because it didn't take them long to convict him. D.A. Rich called Anthony evil of the worst kind. She said he taught the 8 children in his home things about the Bible that were not true, and that helped him get away with his crime for years.
Attorney Dean, on the other hand, said his client admitted to putting his wife's body in the freezer, but he didn't know how she died, adding, "There's evidence in the trial that it could have been by natural causes, and it needs to be explored on appeal."
I don't think I would have been able to say that with a straight face, but okay,
Maybe he uses the money he makes off of clients like Anthony on Botox.
that's good.
Anthony did try to appeal his conviction, but to no avail. When that was unsuccessful, he then filed a suit saying his constitutional rights had been violated and his trial and appeals had been prejudiced by TV producers who had made a dramatization of the case, as well as the district attorney, the pathologist, and a police officer. The suit claimed these defendants were liable for slander, defamation, providing false information, and emotional distress. In reality, it seems like his feelings got hurt because he was called a murderer before the trial, and it was said that his wife was murdered when the autopsy could not determine the cause of death. He also didn't like that his likeness and information regarding the case were used without his consent for a TV program. There was a lot of legalese, but ultimately, the suit was dismissed. Anthony is serving his sentence at the Bibb Correctional Facility in Brent. His first parole hearing was on August 16th, 2023, and parole was denied. His next parole hearing is scheduled for August 1st, 2028, during which we hope he meets a similar fate. And I just have to say, so many kudos to the stepdaughters for testifying. That must have been hell on earth to relive all of that unimaginable trauma. But also good on Arletha for trying to protect her daughter as soon as she found out about the abuse. I don't know how many disgusting cases I've heard about where the other parent either enables or participates in the abuse. It's just tragic that Arletha's decency and bravery led to her murder.
It really is sad that she seems to be in the minority of cases we've heard about, where the parent is a fierce protector more often than not. They, as you said, either enable or participate in the abuse or call their children liars and refuse to believe them. And yet, kudos to the stepdaughters. I can't imagine getting up and testifying to the horrific things that happened to you and then being cross-examined by, a piece of shit defense attorney.
Yeah, so really good on them. Next week, we'll be continuing our series on religious leaders who kill family members when we discuss the case of Nick Hackney.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifyingly Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifyingly Typical Pod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.